Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy. I am your host, Hananya Abraham, and I have a special guest that I'm very excited to be speaking about today because of the topic we're talking about, which is a really near and dear one, especially regarding parenting, at least in my opinion. Hersh Rephun, who has played stand-up comedy gigs across the country. And Hersh brings to his stage presence, keynote talks, and hosts 2 interview shows ranked in the top 2% of Apple podcasts globally. So without further ado, Hersh, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here with you, Hananya. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. And, being that you are a comedy professional, if that's the right way to say it, I'm sort of curious, just to dive right into it over here, we talk about parenting over here. There's a lot of things that you do, I could say, for business that also comes into the house and plays a big role in how you parent. And I'm curious, what is that balance? Is there a difference in how you go about things on the stage or with a mic as opposed to how you would do things at home?
That's a really cool question because I have never really been asked that. And I appreciate the question. I think one feeds the other. So I think, my home life feeds, how I perform on the stage and in work and all of that. And at the same time, it affects my home life in the sense that, I've exposed my comedy and what I do to, my wife and kids. And I think all the kids have their own take on it. Each kid has their own take on it. And so I think the comedy has really helped create a wonderful family environment and vice versa.
Sure. Are there times where, you might try to say something where you'll just get these like blank stares and it sort of, just adds a little more tension to the room instead of it being the opposite?
Yeah. Have I bombed it? Are you talking about at home?
Oh, yeah. Specifically at home.
That's what I thought. Yes. Yeah. There are times where I've tried to be funny and I just bomb, I try to, get a certain reaction. It just doesn't work because the kids are like, they're on a different wavelength.
Right. I could imagine, maybe you could talk a little bit about, different age gaps that you would have between kids and how does that come into play regarding how you would communicate with them? Similar, I guess you could say, to different types of crowds that you're performing for, whether you're performing for a corporate event or in front of a comedy seller or a private event, you're going to act a little bit different. So how does that come into play regarding how you would communicate with your kids in different ages? And maybe, even talk about the different ages that you have.
Yeah. Well, they range in age from 9 to 31. So, and there's 5 of them. So they, yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, well, yeah. That's great. Great. Congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And they're very different. My oldest son, Menachem, is a writer and he works for a nonprofit and as well writes poetry and young adult novels and sci-fi stuff. And, so he is, it's funny because as my firstborn, it's like as a parent, you have no favorites. Every child is different. Right. But as my firstborn, he was the first that I connected with, obviously. And so I have this experience, this long now history of communicating with him, and his appreciation for my sense of humor is the first contact, the first one. So I think that I'm just really connected in terms of the humor.
For sure.
Let's put it that way. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think it's only makes sense that as your relationship with anyone matures and blossoms, it takes on different.
Oh, for sure.
It takes on different tones and different shades. And then Aryeh is my second born son, and he's always been. I was just thinking about this yesterday. He's always been very business oriented, very business minded, which I think is amazing, which is wonderful. And I was thinking yesterday, where does he get it? Like, where does he get it from? Because I don't know that was really something that I was gifted with. Like when you think about your genetic imprinting, your makeup, your DNA, and you think about that, and I'm like, well, I have it in there. It's just that I've had to work harder to access it, and it came naturally to him. And I thought, he must have gotten it from somewhere, but he could have gotten it from his mom, or he could have get it from me, or he could get it from anywhere. But it's more like his DNA was just that he accessed it sooner.
And how has that
he has
worked
an amazing
within
sense
your
of humor.
connection to him and, seeing him different from you and obviously different from your oldest, from Menachem. How has that sort of played into that, parenting balance that we have to have?
I think that what's happened is that I've learned from him in a certain way. I think with he and Menachem, and their difference is, 2 years, a year and a half, age difference. And I think that, first of all, his essence is both of those kids, their essence is very pure. And so they connected very much on a level of honesty, because Menachem is who he is, and he's a very straightforward, honest person. And Aryeh is the same. And on that level, even though Menachem is a bookish kind of, not bookish like great in school, because he wasn't, because at 7, he was diagnosed with Asperger's. And that was, I've talked about this with him recently. It was a relief to get the diagnosis, to have something kind of, he struggled for the 7 years, trying to fit in, trying to understand what's wrong with me. Before the diagnosis, we were walking to synagogue one Saturday, and he broke down and sat down on the curb and said, "I'm broken, Daddy, I'm broken."
Oh, and it's like one of the worst things we can ever experience as a parent.
Right. But it did open the door to understanding what he was going through. And of course, I said, "You're not broken. Nobody's broken, but I understand what you're saying. You're feeling like you could look at that so many ways, right? Are you feeling broken because you're dysfunctional? Are you feeling broken because you're not working properly? Or are you feeling broken because you're broken down and you've been, there's so many ways you can look at it."
And there you are validating him. I think that really opens up the door, for connection towards you, and obviously feeling a certain way for himself. Now, so there you are, you have these two, above later 20s, early 30s, you have two kids in the middle. What are their ages?
Okay. So then Tessa, who's 26. No. She's 27. Yeah, that's right. Oh boy, it's so funny. Okay. So
just think of all your passwords, and then you'll remember your kids' birthdays.
Right. Exactly. Right. That's so funny. That's something you have to work against, is the obvious, password. But Tessa, and it's funny. I think of, I was trying to remember. She's married. She and her husband Zev recently welcomed their first child. And my first granddaughter.
Wow. Congratulations.
So thank you. So that alone, tells you a lot. She knows what she wants, and she's the real deal. That's her thing. She knows what she wants, and she's the real deal. But keep in mind, the real deal is that she's very soulful. She's incredibly soulful. She's incredibly committed to her identity. She lives in Israel, and her relationship with the older brothers has been one where I think she's always gotten along with her oldest brother, but because he's also kind of, and always been very loving, but I think, she sometimes feels like the older sister, right? And he sometimes feels like the older brother, but which he is.
So they're butting heads like siblings do.
No, not butting heads. It's not so much about butting heads. It's about relating to one another best. How do they relate to one another best? Think of it that way. Like, how do they find each other and see each other and meet each other? But very little conflict. But with Aryeh, with her brother, a lot of conflict as kids.
And there's one more you said that's underneath her.
There's
before the 9-year-old.
There's one more underneath her, and that's Keaton, and she's 15 going on 16. She'll be 16.
Do you mean 15 going on 21?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
aren't they? Right?
Right.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
Aren't they all?
Right.
And she, because Menachem, Aryeh, and Tessa are from my first marriage, right? So there's that. So she's the first child from my current marriage. And so I think she came into this family, which is one family, you look at it that way. She is, has her own, I think, her own dream of who she is, and, brought magic into the family in a new way.
That's beautiful.
Brought a new kind of magic.
So, and we also have, the 9-year-old who's the youngest, and
Samantha.
Right. You have 3 decades in your kids, and just seeing the different things that they each bring to the table in so many different ways, so many beautiful ways. I'm curious, how does that affect regarding your parenting to have, hey, it's not fair, she gets this, or I didn't get that when I was her age.
Right.
And then there's always that riff regarding why are you parenting differently here than you are here? How has that been something that you've for sure been challenged with throughout the years?
Well, Hananya, it's a evolution on my part.
Oh, yeah.
That I've had to take a journey as a parent, because I think it isn't fair in a way. It's totally not fair in the sense that I am a better father now, right? Hopefully. But what I've learned from being a parent to the oldest children, I've brought to each of the younger 2, right? And I think that that's been really a blessing to everyone, like in myself, it's been a blessing to me. And it's been a blessing in terms of my relationship with each.
How about within the relationship?
But it's not fair.
Yeah, but it's exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not fair that that I didn't, show up to the oldest child with the knowledge that I have now. But how could you?
I think that's also some of the, I like to call them perks just because I'm the oldest as well. So the perks of being the oldest, of also being the guinea pig in many ways for us, for the first time parents. So, it has,
and I'm the youngest.
So, it's a complete opposite in that sense. And I'm sure there's some that you can relate to your youngest differently than the way you might relate to Menachem. Just, in that sense of, we are in the same boat. We're together in this. And I think that applies to all parents when, we could relate to certain aspects of our kids in certain ways. I think we also have a opportunity for ourselves to make sure that we have things in control when we're dealing with each one individually, which is what we're trying to do is parent each child for what they need. And to hear you talk about and articulate for all 5 of them how different and how special and how unique each one of them are, we have an opportunity of growth to say, okay, so I need to focus on making sure that I'm parenting for that one, for what they need. And even if they're coming from, in a way, 2 separate families and we're coming together and being a family, that doesn't change for what my job is as a parent. At the same time, that can pose so many challenges. And so I'm curious to hear from you. You talk about that personal growth, being that you've had all these experiences throughout the past 30 years of being a parent, and there's so much that you've learned for yourself. What can you turn around, even though you're not done with this journey? What can you turn around and look back at yourself and say, hey, this is something that I've learned that has been a real growth type experience for me over the past 30 years?
I would say have patience with yourself, have patience with your children. There is no easy fix to anything. There's no easy fix to anything. And there's nothing promised. And so appreciate everything that comes and have patience with everything.
I love how you divide the patience with self and the patience with your kids. And I think that's such an important point. One of the things that I was thinking of as you were saying patience with self, what comes up for me is the concept of judgmentalism and being very, very hard on ourselves, and that self-critic that we all can relate to in some way, shape, or form. And, like, oh my God, I'm not a good parent. I suck. I'm doing the wrong thing. I don't know what I'm doing. And that constant self-doubt. And then you have another job of obviously your work that you do. And then you have a second marriage and you have two more kids and you're trying to have this homogenous family that's able to be a unit. That could be very, very difficult at times. So I'm curious to hear from you when you talk about that judgmental part, and that's something that you've had to work on. How has that manifest itself within the parenting dynamics? And how has that been something that you've been able to work on?
Wow. Well, judgment, as you point out, it's not only, first of all, this is us being hard on ourselves. It's everyone having in themselves. You know how you used to see the stereotype of the good the angel and the devil. The angel on one shoulder, and the devil on the other. That do this, do that. No, do this, do that. Right? That stereotype. Well, I think we each have that same devil and angel that tells us, the devil tells us to judge, and the angel tells us
compassion.
To have, as we would say in Yiddish, Rahmanis, right? Have compassion, right? And I think that having been the recipient of harsh judgment, in the sense that I think, I know what it's like to be judged, and that makes me
so from your
a more compassionate person. And so from my experiences, I have become more compassionate, and I have learned that I love my children unconditionally, and that it's important that they know that I love them unconditionally. And with that, I already see in every single one of my kids a compassion for their fellow human being. And I think that it is not infallible, nor is it easily won. So the fact that I see it there, it's important that I understand that
you're not taking it for granted.
It doesn't come for free, and it doesn't come without struggle and a price. I'm not taking it for granted, but I'm gratified to know. And it also doesn't come without repeating, right? You have to, on our part as parents, we have to, if we're going to be loving our child unconditionally, then we're going to have to work at that, and we're going to have to sharpen and practice that. And if as children, we're going to be compassionate toward others, we're going to learn that lesson. We have to look over our shoulder and be cognizant of the challenges that come with that. Being love and the responsibility that we may choose to take on ourselves, with the freedom that comes with being loved unconditionally.
For sure. And I think a lot of parenting, it's not just about taking responsibilities. When you're going to be a parent, there's an automatic responsibility, and hopefully we're going to take ownership over that responsibility. Yeah. So I think that's a important point as well. Going back, to hearing about your profession and what it is that you do. And I think one of the hardest parts, at least for someone that I think at one point in my life, I had a wanting to get up there on stage like Johnny Carson or Jerry Seinfeld, and just being able to have that confidence. So I want to touch on that point specifically, where there's a certain confidence that needs to be when you're standing up there on stage, when there's a limelight on you and no one else can be seen except for you.
Right.
And I'm curious with that limelight, with that confidence, and maybe also insecurities, how has that been a attribute to your parenting?
Ooh, very good question. By the way, I'll cop to something now, which is unrelated, but it's related, of course. But whenever an interview subject, because I'm an interviewer myself, whenever an interviewer's subject says, what a great question, what they're doing in addition to complimenting the host is they're buying a moment to put their thoughts together. And so it's a compliment. It's not a cop-out, but it indicates that the question has a certain weight and taken them back a moment and they need to formulate the answer. So that's a really good question. Means something. It means I'm going to need a minute for that, but the confidence that we have on stage, that we need on stage, really, really helps. Oh man, does it help? I hadn't thought about that, but it really does, because when I know what it takes, it's like if I were a firefighter and I then confronted in the home, some kind of, heaven forbid, some disaster, I would bring that to it and say, all right, I'm cool, collected. I'm going in. I'm focusing on fixing this problem. I'm going to put out this fire. I'm going to here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to cover all that stuff they're going to bring to it. Stop, drop, and roll, and all the things they're going to handle.
All of your training.
All the training. Thank you. All the training will come to bear. So the training that you get in front of an audience is that your control is not contingent upon the response of the audience. So if you've seen a comedian handle a heckler, or if you've seen a comedian handle even surprises, things that happen, not intentional, just the moment, extemporaneous stuff, then you've seen that really good comedians have that bearing, that they are in control. I go back to, I think of, in my own experience, and I'll give you an example as a father, an example as a comedian. As a comedian, and I haven't shared this, but if anyone had seen the video of it, because it was videotaped,
okay.
I was doing a show and I had a bit called 3 Rules of Israeli Comedy. 3 Rules of Israeli Comedy. And I would do an impression, my Israeli impression. And I would say, there are 3 rules for Israeli comedy. I do the bit. And one of the rules is, you don't understand it, I'm going to send you a message text. I say, I'm going to send you a message text. And I did this whole bit, and who remembers the bit? But the point was, there was someone in the audience, and they said, oh, message text. Like, he picked up on my flipping the words. And it wasn't that I was thrown. Right. It was that I had an opportunity to jump on the fact that this guy could be heard speaking out. He wasn't heckling. Maybe he was. He was a good friend of mine as it happened. And he picked up on that. And I said, you got a problem? Right. Well, it's for you. It's a problem. And it was a chance for me to further drive the character home. But the point was that there had been moments where people would do this. There was a woman in the front who had had too much to drink, could not stop laughing hysterically. Did not mean to cause a problem, could not stop laughing hysterically, had to be carried out. Being able to do that. And I'm like, look, sometimes when you're that good at what you do, sometimes it hits too hard. It's like, but whatever. And as a father, I think, having the sense, the reminder that this isn't, like this was a simple example that just happened yesterday. It's not that it's so memorable. I'm sure I'll forget it in 10 minutes, but my daughter was having a party at the house. My older daughter that's still home, that's 15, was having a party for the first time, hosting a party at the house without the parents there, but nearby, of course, but, giving her the reins, and she had to go around and tell some of the neighbors, the close neighbors, that we would be having a party, and the younger daughter wanted to go with her. The 9-year-old wanted to go with her. And I was like, no, that's not, it's not your job to go with your sister. She's doing something very important, and it can't be taken lightly. And she's kind of a character, the younger one. Well, you can't go be a character in front of the neighbor. It's gonna diffuse the seriousness and the gravity of what your big sister's trying to convey. And I had to be able to say that with authority, even though it's not a huge deal, and have the young one understand that I'm being serious and that this isn't a play situation. It isn't a silly situation. And I think when you're a stand-up comedian, hey, this is how we run the show here. This is how we're running the show.
Right. So you have to have your foot down. You have to put your foot down to sort of say, hey, this is the way things are. Very good.
Yeah, you got to be able to put your foot down. And this is a thing that's not negotiable. There's not any time to discuss it. It's not particularly grave, but it is.
How about the opposite? I think for a friend that is in the comedic world that might be having some insecurity issues, how would a professional comedian correlate the insecurities / imposter syndromes that might come up into parenting, which we constantly have those, what the hell am I doing here moments?
Yeah. Yeah. How would I tell them to put that into practice?
What are those similarities and how, the way you would get yourself out of those funk zones as a comedic professional, how can that be applied to the parenting world?
I think that the best advice is that, what is at the core of comedy? A willingness to make fun of ourselves. We're also willing to do it before. And I think anyone who's been either bullied or made fun of often takes on that self-deprecating thing because we want to take a little jab at ourselves before anyone else does it. It will hurt less if we do it ourselves. And so we learn to have a tougher skin and we learn to laugh at ourselves. And I think the best advice in terms of actually, it may sound counterintuitive, but it's not, to maintain control in the household and to have the best outcome in the household is to remember to not take ourselves so seriously.
Right.
And that, goes back to the patience thing we talked about a while ago. If you go back to that, if we remind ourselves, okay, you know what? I'm not this isn't about what's not going to work. And it's good that you asked that question because it goes with the last answer. It's not going to work to say, hey, you're not going to have a happy home that way. This is what it is. This is the way. Boom, boom, boom. Has to be a little self-deprecation, a little humor, healthy self-deprecation. Because I do want to say that some of us either inherit or develop a self-deprecating point of view. And I have dealt with this in my kids. I certainly had it. The relatability that I have for my kids' struggles.
From the way we were parented.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the way, my parents were phenomenal parents. And, if anything, I was probably sheltered from a lot of the ugliness of the world by the warmth and love of my parents. But I saw, judgment can come in from a place of fear for your child. Well, judgment always comes from a place of fear. But the difference with a parent being judgmental, and in this case, I think it was, the examples were my mom being afraid of something that might happen to the family or happen to the kid, and therefore judging their behavior or being afraid to not live up to being the parent they want to be, and therefore judging the child's behavior harshly for their own good. That's the best way I can explain it. So it isn't a reverse judgment against the parent. It's the parent, because of their own fear, overprotecting or judging the child. So therefore, the best way to avoid that is to take a step back and laugh. Take a step back and laugh at yourself.
Not be so hard on yourself.
Not be so hard on yourself. And then you won't be so hard on the kid, right? Because if you give yourself a break, why do you think people are so austere? Because they're not giving themselves a break. There's nobody who's like, you're probably not going to see Jimmy Buffett, who's got this laid back, parrot head, lifestyle, beach lifestyle, turn around and say to his kid, hey, what are you doing? Get out of there. Get out of that cookie jar. You got to be there on time. He's probably going to take a certain tact. I don't know. I don't know him personally.
Sure.
I don't know.
I would say more Johnny Cash than Jimmy Buffett, but yeah, I get your point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there are so many other questions that we could sort of go here, comparing and contrasting the comedic world and the parenting world. I have one last question for you over here before we go into some rapid fire questions. So you talk about, the concept of having the right delivery and knowing when to maybe expand the joke a little bit so you can take it a little bit further. And it's probably key to any good comedy professional that they know exactly how and when and where to put in those little extra little tidbits. What type of advice would you recommend for someone that has been doing that professionally for such a long time into parenting, as also knowing when, where, and how to say something? For example, you see your child walking out of the house and you already had a few little, I guess you say, back and forth with that teenager. And now they're leaving the house to go to a friend's house and they're dressed a certain way. So, you're going to dress like that when you leave the house? Or is that something that what, this time I'm going to shut my mouth because it's not worth the battle? So, there's a certain, I think, level of a radar that a comedic can have that can maybe be applied to parenting as well. And I'm curious how you would word that.
Yeah, radar is a good word. It's definitely a gauge, and it's something that I personally find I have to correct in myself very often. Like if it's a gauge and you're like, what's wrong with the gauge? My wife has a really good one. I think she's very analytical. So she will see that coming or see the situation in a practical way as much as she's emotionally invested. And at least as much, if not more than I am, but she sees the practical, she sees the analytical point of view, and she knows this is not a fight worth fighting. You don't want to die on this hill. This is not the play. I have a harder time doing that, but I definitely think that humor is the device.
It can be,
because if I can find the humor in it, and I learned that from my dad, that was 100% my dad. My dad had an impeccable sense of humor and excellent timing and very good judgment. And he was an attorney, but the way that a comedian would, he would judge the situation. And I also saw when he struggled with it, like when he wanted so badly to use the comedy to lighten the mood, but it was too the emotions of either a child or a teenager or the situation, thank you, were so complex or heavy that it wouldn't work. So he would try, but it didn't hurt. Humor did diffuse the situation. So even in a fight that's not worth fighting, that's not worth losing, I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm going to let it go. It does not the end of the world. I'm going to let it go. But humor will always serve you in good stead. I like to tell this story. One of the things that happens is, and I'll make it short, but one of the stories was this huge blow up in the house. It doesn't matter what it was my oldest sister had done something, which happens because the oldest is the first to test the waters and break the china, and she had done something. And I don't even know what it was because I was probably, we're 5 years apart. She was probably 17, right? So I was probably 12 years old, and I don't remember what happened. And my sister in between was 15 years old. So you got 15 and 17. You can only imagine. Well, you probably have experienced it, but you have 15 and 17-year-old girls. And the 17-year-olds cause an incredible problem. The parents are going crazy. They're united, but they're both furious about it in different ways. I'm like sitting there really awkward and terrified because it honestly is some level of battle that I've never seen.
Right. You're like looking for your popcorn.
Nobody can. Yeah. But even afraid, like if you were afraid to even make a noise and like intractable, like there's no answer. And that was the hardest thing. Everybody's so upset. Everybody's so angry. What do I even do? Or what can I do? My older sister, who's the middle child, walks into the room and sees the fire going on. And she says, can I just ask a question? What does this have to do with me? how does this affect me? And my father laughed and my sister laughed. Everybody had to laugh because she was like, I'm really sorry, but I don't see what this has to do with me. And that was a self-awareness. She brought it down. She used herself as the scapegoat. She also knew that traditionally she had been considered very self-absorbed. And so she used her own fallibility in her favor and she broke the tension. And I don't know how it would have been broken without humor. So I just want to share it. Yeah.
Right. I love that example. That's a really good example. So based on how you started it, talking about your father and how that's been something that you've got to learn from. I'm curious if there's a person that you would give a shout out to that has been a parental inspiration to you over the past 3 decades.
As a parent, someone who's been an inspiration as a parent.
Yeah.
I would say the one that comes to mind is my friend Justo Diaz, who just throw it out there. Just so I don't have to explain why.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So one of my dear friends, and he sadly lost his father when he was 5. So his father had brain cancer, and he lost his father, as did his mom and his older sisters lose their dad. And he was the youngest child, like me, 2 older sisters, and him being the youngest, and became the man of the house. But as a dad, just immediately and instinctively has always just put the children first. And in such a way that, it didn't matter, come hell or high water, the child would get the attention they needed. They would get what they needed. The priorities, like we talked about, the ways you have to put your foot down, able to put the foot down, but with an incredible balance.
Yeah, the very good balance.
Immediately and instinctively. And I believe from the loss of that parent, he took that missing hole and made sure to fill it in the lives of his children because he knew how fleeting that presence can be. And so that's where my admiration goes.
Beautiful. Would there be a book or a podcast or a lecturer that you would recommend to people that are looking to grow in their parenting skills from a comedic point of view?
Well, there's definitely, I don't know that I would point out a particular podcast. I'm certainly glad that yours exists.
Besides for your own.
That's right. No, well, mine isn't about parenting. But I would definitely point to the comedian Jim Gaffigan. Like us, he has 5 kids, and he has a very dark, I don't want to throw it out as very dark, has a surprisingly grounded view of the realities around parenting.
Yes.
And the realities around family.
Okay. And if I'm allowed to, I will post a link to his specific one on parenting. A link. I'll post that in my show notes.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, if you can think of a everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have to be a better dad, what would that be?
A mundane superpower, not like flying, not like making money come out of nowhere. A very mundane. Okay. A mundane superpower.
That has to help with your parenting.
Yes. That I would think would help with my parenting would be the ability to, well, if it's a superpower, it has to be bigger than normal.
Correct.
So, I would say, well, my superpower would be the ability to stop tears from building. You could say stop them from flowing, but it isn't so much that there's something wrong with crying, but there is an accumulation of tears or sadness that we often find takes us by surprise. So being able to...
What would your superpower do?
So my superpower would identify those problems before the tears accumulate too much, so that the problem could be addressed. So it would be a superpower of a sadness sensor that picks up on the sadness that might be going on in somebody, in a child, before it accumulates.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you.
That is amazing. I love that. I love that. I think that's spoken from a true veteran father. So Hersh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hananya. Such a pleasure to be here.
Hey again. I hope you were able to learn as much as I did today. Thank you so much for staying to the end and listening to the entire interview. Please feel free to leave a comment wherever you listen to this podcast. All comments will be read weekly, and we appreciate all feedback and ideas. If you have an idea for a guest or a specific topic, please feel free to share. Additionally, you can contact us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining today, and remember, parenting is a journey. Don't forget to enjoy it. The goal is to be a little better today than yesterday, and hopefully better tomorrow than we were today.